my ex-husband's house, I saw my daughter's back fully covered in red ink. His girlfriend laughed. It's just a few tattoos. I took one look at her and said, I'm so glad you did this. I pick Kay up every other Sunday at 6 p.m. from Jacques' house. But last week when I knocked, Kay didn't run to the door like she usually does. I found her in the living room wearing Jacques' oversized hoodie, facing away from me. Cassie, Jacques' girlfriend, stood there grinning. We had some girl time at my shop. Kay twisted away when I tried to hug her. Something was very wrong. Take off your hoodie, sweetie, I said. She shook her head, tears starting. Cassie laughed. Show your mom your surprise. When Kay wouldn't move, Cassie herself yanked the hoodie up. There it was. 3 Yakuza symbol tattoos running down my 9-year-old daughter's back. Black, green, and red ink, still covered in plastic wrap. The skin was angry and red underneath. Cassie's always been trying to be the cool stepmom. She owns a tattoo parlor downtown, keeps buying Kay crop tops, bra padding, and low-cut jeans, teaching her to wear makeup. Jacques thinks it's harmless. But this crossed every line. She said she wanted to be tough like in the movies. Cassie said, it means she's a warrior now. She showed me her phone proudly. It was a video of Kay crying, trying to pull away from the tattoo table while Jacques held her shoulders and Cassie worked the needle. Stop being such a baby. These symbols mean you're strong. Kay's voice in the video, begging. I don't want to be strong. I want to go home. It hurts, please, Cassie. But Cassie was laughing. Pain only makes you stronger. She deliberately pressed her needle harder, drawer louder screams from Kay. I scooped Kay into my arms immediately. She sobbed into my shoulder. Jacques suddenly appeared from the kitchen, beer in hand. Why are you being dramatic again? You call your girlfriend tattooing Yakuza symbols on our 9-year-old daughter dramatic? I shot back. He just shrugged. They're just some Japanese symbols. She watches that anime stuff anyway. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Do you know what these symbols mean? They're gang markings. You let her put gang markings on our child. Jacques rolled his eyes. You're being racist. It's just Asian art. It's body modification of a minor. It's assault. I headed for the door. Cassie blocked my path. You can't just take her. It's still Jacques' custody time for another 30 minutes. Watch me. Jacques grabbed my arm. You're overreacting, like always. This is why we divorced. I scoffed at him. No, we divorced because you're a worthless father who lets his girlfriend assault our child. I pushed past them to my car, Kay clinging to me. Cassie followed, shouting. She wanted it. She begged for it. I looked right at her. I don't care. Oh, and by the way, I transformed my face into a smile. I'm so glad you did this. Cassie's face changed immediately. Wait, what? What do you mean you're glad I did this? You were just mad about it a second ago? I know. See you later. I drove off without saying another word, leaving Jacques and Cassie absolutely panicking. Their texts flooded in before I even got home. What do you mean you're happy? Why are you glad? But I didn't respond. Seeing their panic, I turned my phone off and just let them spiral. I researched online about all the best ways to heal tattoos, what to do to decrease visibility, and held Kay while she cried. All the meanwhile, my phone was now blowing up with my extended family. Everyone begging me to tell them what I meant when I said I was glad. How could I be? My daughter had just been tattooed with Yakuza symbols. I decided to just ignore everyone and continue planning on my next steps, when the next morning, Jacques and Cassie showed up to our house unannounced. I sent Kay upstairs before answering. What do you mean you're glad? Cassie was still yelling. Come in and I'll show you. That stumped them both. Like deer in headlights, they stared at me wondering what I had inside the house. I told them I wasn't lying when I said I was happy about the tattoos, and that I even got a special gift to thank them. All they had to do was follow me into the living room. You're scaring me, Jacques said. But I didn't respond. Simply took his hand and slowly led them inside. Past the staircase, past the stairwell where Kay and I kept our shoes, past the downstairs bathroom where Kay spent 4 hours crying last night. The more we walked, the more nervous Jacques and Cassie got, especially when they heard a sound coming from the living room. Is Kay in there? I can apologize. Cassie's voice was low, a total shift from the snarky attitude she'd had when I first saw the tattoo. It's not Kay, I responded. It's someone who actually wants to talk to you. I stared at my Jacques. The implication that his daughter doesn't want to talk to him again hung heavy in the air. We continued walking through the kitchen, and it's only when we got to the living room double doors that they put the 2 and 2 together. Please, you don't have to do this, Cassie started pleading. I'll shut my shop down. I'll relinquish parental rights, Jacques added. They literally put their hands together. Cassie was crying. I'm sorry. But it was too late for apologies. I told them exactly that. I opened the doors to the living room and watched their faces. It was even worse than they had imagined. What they saw was Detective Brody Bradshaw and CPS worker Sophia Walker sitting on my couch with folders spread across the coffee table. Cassie's face went completely white and she actually gasped out loud, grabbing Jacques' arm so hard her knuckles turned pale. Jacques took a step backward like he wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't work right. I felt this cold wave of satisfaction watching them realize that apologies weren't going to fix this, that I'd actually called the authorities while they were panicking over my cryptic comment. Bradshaw stood up slowly, his badge clipped to his belt catching the light, and his presence filled the whole room with this heavy official weight. Sophia stayed seated, but her eyes were sharp, taking in every detail of Jacques and Cassie's reactions. Cassie started shaking her head back and forth, her mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. Jacques finally found his voice and it came out all strangled and high. The detective introduced himself in this calm, professional tone that somehow made everything feel even more serious and real. Sophia explained in her kind but firm voice that they needed to interview Jacques and Cassie separately about what happened to Kay, and I watched Cassie's legs actually wobble like she might fall over. I told them Kay was upstairs and wouldn't be coming down for this, and Sophia nodded with this look of approval that made me feel like I was doing something right for once. She said they'd need to speak with Kay later using proper child interview protocols at the advocacy center. Jacques started to protest, his voice getting louder as he said something about his rights as a father. But Detective Bradshaw just looked at him with this expression that was completely blank, but somehow made Jacques' mouth snap shut mid-sentence. Sophia asked if she could briefly see Kay just to verify she was safe and not in immediate distress right now. I agreed, but told her firmly that I was staying with Kay the entire time, and Sophia said that was actually preferred and appropriate. We went upstairs together, Sophia's shoes making soft sounds on the carpet, and I opened Kay's bedroom door slowly. Kay was curled up on her bed with her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest, and when she saw Sophia, she pressed herself further into the pillows. Sophia stayed near the doorway, keeping her voice gentle and quiet as she asked Kay if she was okay, and if she needed anything right now. Kay just shook her head without speaking, and reached one hand out toward me. I sat on the edge of her bed, and she immediately grabbed onto my arm, and Sophia made some notes on a small pad, before telling Kay very softly that she was safe now. We went back downstairs where Detective Bradshaw was already separating Jacques and Cassie into different rooms, and I could hear Cassie's voice getting high and panicky from the dining room. The detective asked me to come into the kitchen with him while Sophia stayed to monitor the others. He pulled out his phone and asked me to show him any messages I'd received after leaving Jacques' house yesterday. I scrolled through the flood of panic texts, screenshot after screenshot of them begging to know what I meant about being glad this happened. Bradshaw photographed each message carefully with his phone, the camera clicking over and over. He asked me to describe exactly what I saw when I picked up Kay, and I walked him through every single detail, including the video Cassie had proudly shown me on her phone. My voice stayed steady as I described Kay crying and trying to pull away from the tattoo table, while Jacques held her shoulders down. Bradshaw's expression didn't change, but he wrote everything down in precise detail, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timing or exact words that were said. Sophia came in after the detective finished taking my statement, and she explained that Kay would need a medical examination to document the injuries properly. Her voice stayed professional but kind, as she told me these steps were necessary to build a proper case and make sure Kay stayed safe. I felt my hands start shaking again, this tremor I couldn't quite control, but I nodded and asked when we needed to do this. Sophia said we could go right now if I was ready, that she'd already called ahead to an urgent care clinic 2 blocks away. We took Kay in my car and she sat in the back seat clutching her rabbit and not saying anything. The doctor at the clinic specialized in documenting child abuse cases, and she was incredibly gentle with Kay, explaining everything before she did it. She carefully lifted Kay's shirt and photographed the tattoos from multiple angles, the camera flash making Kay flinch each time. The doctor noted the inflammation in her report, the way Kay's skin was still angry and red around the ink, and she asked Kay to point to where it hurt the most. Kay's voice was so quiet when she answered that the doctor had to lean in close to hear. The doctor gave us detailed aftercare instructions for the healing process, and wrote a prescription for antibiotic ointment to prevent infection. Back at home after the clinic visit, I sent Kay upstairs to rest, and then I carefully photographed her back myself with my phone. I made sure the images were clear and well lit, taking shots from different angles just like the doctor had done. My hands were steadier now that I had a concrete task to focus on. I immediately uploaded copies to 3 different cloud storage accounts, typing in passwords and waiting for the progress bars to complete. Then I emailed the photos to myself at 2 different email addresses, creating this digital paper trail that couldn't be erased or lost, no matter what happened. The methodical task of documentation helped me feel like I was doing something real to protect my daughter, instead of just being scared and angry. That evening, my phone rang with Sophia's number, and she explained they'd drafted a safety plan based on their initial assessment. Kay would stay with me full-time with absolutely no contact allowed between Cassie and Kay under any circumstances. Jacques could have limited supervised contact only, and even that was pending the investigation results and whatever court orders came down. I felt this wave of relief wash over me, even though I knew this was just the beginning of what would probably be a very long process. The next morning, I met with Amelia Dubois at her law office downtown, a family attorney who came highly recommended for custody cases involving child safety issues. She sat across from me at her big desk and listened to everything without interrupting once. And when I showed her the photos and texts on my phone, her expression got very serious and focused. She immediately started drafting paperwork for emergency custody modification and protective orders, her fingers flying across her keyboard. Her confidence and her clear action plan made me feel less helpless for the first time since I'd seen those tattoos on Kay's back. Amelia worked through the afternoon preparing detailed affidavits that included the medical photos, the CPS notes, and a complete timeline of events. She explained she was filing for ex parte emergency orders that would give me temporary full custody and prohibit Cassie from any contact with Kay whatsoever. I signed everything with shaking hands, my signature looking wobbly and strange on the official documents, hoping the judge would see how serious this was and how much danger Kay had been in. That same afternoon, my phone rang with Detective Bradshaw's number, and I answered on the second ring. He told me he was seeking a warrant to search Cassie's tattoo shop for records, equipment, and her phone to preserve the video evidence. His voice was steady and professional, but I could hear something underneath it, like he was personally invested in making sure this case got handled right. I thanked him for taking Kay's situation seriously and not treating it like some minor family dispute. He reminded me not to have any direct contact with Jacques or Cassie going forward and to document everything they sent me, screenshots of every text and voicemail. I promised I would and hung up feeling like the wheels were actually turning now instead of just spinning. Later that evening, Amelia sent me a text with strict instructions to avoid any direct confrontation with Jacques or Cassie and to stay completely off social media about this case. She explained that anything I said or posted could be used against me in court, and I needed to protect the integrity of our case by keeping my mouth shut. I wanted to scream at them both, to post everything online and let everyone see what they did to Kay, but I knew Amelia was right. I took a screenshot of her message and saved it in a folder on my phone labeled Reminders, so I could look at it whenever I felt the urge to lash out. My phone kept buzzing all evening with calls and texts from extended family members demanding to know what was happening and why I wouldn't explain my cryptic comment from yesterday. My aunt called 3 times, my cousin sent a string of question marks, my mom left a voicemail saying she was worried and confused. I finally sent one group text saying there was a legal matter involving Kay's safety and I couldn't discuss details right now. Then I muted the entire conversation. The boundary felt good even though I knew some relatives would be offended and probably talk about me being dramatic or secretive. Jacques' texts started shifting from panic to pure anger around midnight. He accused me of trying to alienate Kay from him and blowing everything out of proportion just to hurt him. He said I was being vindictive and using Kay as a weapon in our divorce all over again. I didn't respond to any of it, but I screenshot every single message and forwarded them to Amelia in one long thread. She replied within minutes saying his hostile tone would actually help our case and to keep documenting everything. His complete inability to take responsibility for what happened was exactly why we were divorced in the first place, why I couldn't trust him to keep Kay safe. 2 days later, I took Kay to the Child Advocacy Center for her forensic interview with a specially trained interviewer. The building looked normal from outside, just a regular office with a small playground visible through the fence, but my stomach felt tight walking through the doors. A woman with kind eyes and a soft voice led Kay into a room with toys and comfortable chairs while I waited in another room down the hall. I sat there for 40 minutes staring at magazines without reading them, my leg bouncing constantly. When Sophia came out, her expression was serious and she sat down next to me before speaking. She told me Kay had disclosed that Jacques physically held her shoulders down while Cassie tattooed her, pressing hard enough that Kay couldn't move even when she tried. The detail made me feel physically sick, but it also validated that I was doing the right thing by pursuing this case. That afternoon, Detective Bradshaw called again to tell me Cassie was claiming Jacques gave verbal consent for the tattoos as Kay's father, so technically she had parental permission. Jacques was now saying the whole thing was a misunderstanding, and he didn't realize Cassie would actually go through with tattooing Kay. Their stories didn't match up, and both of them were trying to minimize their roles, which the detective said was typical in these cases when people realized they might face real consequences. I asked if the conflicting stories helped our case, and he said absolutely, that juries and judges could see through people trying to shift blame. The health department opened an inspection of Cassie's tattoo shop the next day to check if she'd been following age verification and consent protocols. Amelia explained this was separate from the criminal case, but could result in license suspension or revocation if they found violations. I felt this grim satisfaction knowing Cassie's business was now under scrutiny from multiple angles, that her whole livelihood might crumble because she thought it was cool to tattoo a 9-year-old. I met with Kay's school counselor 2 days later to explain the situation in general terms without going into graphic details. We sat in her small office surrounded by motivational posters, and she listened carefully while taking notes. We agreed on a plan to let Kay wear comfortable loose clothing instead of the regular uniforms that might rub against her healing tattoos and cause irritation. The counselor promised to watch for any signs Kay was struggling emotionally and to contact me immediately if concerns came up. 3 days after our emergency filing, Jacques' lawyer filed a counter motion, claiming I was unstable and engaging in parental alienation by keeping Kay from him. Reading through his accusations made my blood boil, seeing him twist everything to make me look like the problem instead of taking responsibility. Amelia reminded me this was a predictable defensive tactic that desperate parents used when they knew they were in the wrong. She was already preparing our response with all the evidence we'd gathered, the medical photos and CPS reports and witness statements. That afternoon, Amelia spent 2 hours preparing me for court testimony at her office. She drilled me on how to stick to facts without letting emotion take over my answers. She made me practice responding to hostile questions calmly, made me repeat answers until they sounded steady instead of angry. She reminded me the judge would be watching my behavior as much as listening to my words, that I needed to come across as the stable, protective parent. I felt more ready after our session, even though my hands still shook thinking about facing Jacques in court. Wednesday afternoon arrived, and I sat at the long wooden table in the small courtroom next to Amelia, while Jacques sat across the aisle with his lawyer. The judge, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses, flipped through the thick file of evidence we'd submitted. She studied the medical photos for a long time, her expression getting more serious with each page. Amelia had organized everything perfectly with tabs marking each section. The judge asked Jacques' lawyer if his client disputed any of the documented facts, and the lawyer admitted they did not. She asked me directly if I believed Kay was in danger during Jacques' custody time, and I answered yes without hesitation. The judge reviewed Safia's initial assessment report and the detective's investigation summary. After maybe 20 minutes, she looked up and said she was granting temporary primary custody to me, with Jacques allowed only supervised visits at an approved facility. Cassie was completely barred from any contact with Kay, period. My hands gripped the edge of the table as she signed the order right there. Amelia squeezed my arm gently, and I had to blink hard to keep from crying in front of everyone. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt like I could finally breathe properly for the first time in weeks. That evening, I was making dinner when the doorbell rang, and then Jacques started pounding on the door. His voice was loud and angry, yelling that he needed to talk to me right now about the court order. I could see him through the window, and neighbors were starting to look out from their porches. I stayed inside with the door locked and called Detective Bradshaw's number from my contacts. He answered on the second ring, and I explained what was happening. He said he'd send a patrol officer right away, and to stay inside and keep documenting. The officer arrived within 10 minutes, and I watched through the window as he talked to Jacques on the porch. The officer's hand stayed near his belt, and his posture was firm. He pointed down the street, and Jacques finally left, but not before yelling something I couldn't hear. The officer came to my door, and I let him in to take my statement. He wrote everything down in his notebook and told me this would go in the case file as a violation of the protective order's spirit. Later that night, I was scrolling through my phone when I saw Cassie had posted on social media. Her post talked about being targeted by a witch hunt and how people rushed to judge without knowing the full story. She used phrases like my truth and unfair attacks, without naming anyone specifically. My finger hovered over the reply button, and I wanted to screenshot the video of Kay crying and post it for everyone to see. But I remembered Amelia's warning about staying off social media and not engaging. I closed the app and put my phone face down on the counter. Let Cassie dig her own hole while I focused on keeping Kay safe. The next morning, Safia knocked on our door for her scheduled home visit. She walked through our house with a clipboard, looking at everything with professional eyes. She checked that Kay had her own bedroom with clean sheets and her stuffed animals arranged on the bed. She opened our refrigerator and pantry to see we had proper food. She asked about my work schedule and how I managed childcare when I was at the office. She wanted to know Kay's daily routine from wake up to bedtime. At the end, she sat at our kitchen table and told me everything looked stable and appropriate. She said she could see Kay felt safe here, and that I was providing a good home environment. The validation made my shoulders relax a little. 2 days later, I took Kay to her first appointment with Dong, the child therapist Safia had recommended. His office was in a quiet building with a waiting room full of toys and books. Dong came out to meet us, and he had a gentle voice and warm smile. He explained to Kay that they would work together to help her feel better about what happened. Kay stayed close to me at first, barely looking at him, but he was patient and didn't push. He showed her his office, which had art supplies and a sand tray and comfortable chairs. By the end of the hour, Kay was talking a little bit, answering his questions in quiet words. He gave me homework about how to support her healing at home, things like validating her feelings and maintaining predictable routines. Detective Bradshaw called me that afternoon while I was picking Kay up from the school. He told me they'd executed the search warrant at Cassie's tattoo shop that morning while she was there with clients. Officers had seized her record books, consent forms, and computer files. He said they found no documentation at all for Kay. No minor consent forms or proper parental permission papers. The lack of paperwork strengthened the case that Cassie knew exactly what she was doing was wrong. I thanked him for the update and felt this cold satisfaction knowing the evidence kept building. The next day, Amelia called to tell me the health department had sent Cassie a notice about an administrative hearing. They'd cited her for multiple violations, including bad record keeping and failure to verify age and consent properly. The notice imposed immediate demands that she fix her procedures right away, or face license suspension. Amelia had gotten a courtesy copy since it related to our case. I felt like the system was actually working for once. Like all these different agencies were holding Cassie responsible from every angle. That evening, my sister called for the third time that week to give me her opinions about how I should handle Jacques. She thought I was being too harsh and that Kay needed her father in her life. I finally told her firmly that I had a lawyer and a plan, and I needed her to either support me quietly or step back completely. She got hurt and said she was just trying to help. I said I knew, but I needed less advice and more trust right now. She agreed to stop, but I could hear in her voice she was upset. After I hung up, I felt lighter though, like setting that boundary had lifted weight off my shoulders. The first supervised visit got scheduled for Saturday at a neutral visitation center across town. Kay dreaded it all week, getting quiet whenever I mentioned it. Dong helped her practice what to say if she felt uncomfortable during the visit. He taught her a code word, pineapple, that she could use to signal the supervisor she needed the visit to end right away. I packed her favorite stuffed rabbit in a small bag and reminded her over and over that she was safe, and I'd be right outside in the waiting room the whole time. Saturday morning, we drove to the visitation center and met Stella, the court-appointed supervisor. She had kind eyes but a serious manner. She explained the rules to Kay about the code word and showed her the observation window where I'd be watching. The visit itself was hard to watch through that window. Jacques tried to act like everything was normal, asking Kay about school and her friends, but he kept saying things like Cassie made a mistake, and everyone just needed to move on now. Kay sat with her arms crossed tight against her chest and barely spoke. She gave one-word answers and wouldn't look at him. Stella sat in the corner taking detailed notes on her tablet about everything Jacques said and how Kay responded. I could see Kay's body language getting more closed off as Jacques kept trying to minimize what had happened instead of actually apologizing. After 20 minutes, Jacques stood up and walked toward the door, the visit ending early because Kay refused to engage. I grabbed my bag and headed to the lobby to collect her, watching through the glass as Stella wrote notes on her tablet. That's when a silver sedan pulled into the parking lot outside. My stomach dropped. Cassie got out of the driver's seat and started walking toward the building entrance. Stella noticed immediately through the front windows and moved fast, pushing through the door before Cassie could reach it. I pressed closer to the glass to hear. Stella held up one hand, and her voice carried through the door. The protective order prohibited any contact with Kay or presence at designated locations. Cassie's face crumpled and she started crying, her hands reaching out. She just wanted to apologize, she kept saying. She needed Kay to know she was sorry. Stella stepped between Cassie and the building, physically blocking the entrance. She needed to leave now or the police would be called for violating a court order. Cassie backed toward her car but kept yelling across the parking lot about how she never meant to hurt anyone, and this wasn't fair. I pulled Kay close to my side as we watched through the window, feeling her body tense against me. Stella stood firm until Cassie finally got in her car and drove away. Back inside, Stella immediately pulled out her tablet and started typing up an incident report. She explained this would go directly to the court and our lawyers, documenting that Cassie couldn't respect basic boundaries even when legally ordered. I thanked her and got Kay to the car as quickly as possible. 3 days later, Detective Bradshaw called and asked me to come to the station. I arranged for my sister to watch Kay and drove downtown to meet him in a small conference room. He had folders spread across the table and a serious expression. He walked me through the charges he was recommending to the district attorney. Endangering the welfare of a child was the primary charge, based on Cassie tattooing a minor without proper consent and causing physical harm. Unlawful tattooing of a minor was a specific statute violation in our state. Misdemeanor assault covered the physical pain and injury Kay experienced. He was careful to explain these were recommendations, not guarantees, and the DA would make the final charging decision. But his tone suggested he believed the evidence was strong enough to pursue. I felt this wave of relief wash over me, knowing real consequences might actually happen. At the same time, exhaustion hit me hard, the weight of everything we'd been through settling on my shoulders. Detective Bradshaw noticed and pushed a box of tissues across the table. He told me the process would take time, but they had solid documentation and witness statements. I nodded and wiped my eyes, trying to pull myself together. The next afternoon, Amelia called me into her office to discuss our legal options beyond the custody case. She had spreadsheets printed out with itemized costs, medical expenses from the urgent care visit and follow-up appointments, therapy costs for Kay's ongoing treatment with Dong, projected expenses for future tattoo removal procedures which would require multiple sessions over several years. She proposed filing a limited civil claim against Cassie and potentially Jacques to recover these costs. I sat there staring at the numbers, feeling conflicted. Part of me wanted to make them pay for every single thing, to hit them where it hurt financially the way they'd hurt Kay. But another part of me just wanted this whole nightmare to be over, so we could move forward with our lives. Amelia must have seen the struggle on my face because she leaned back in her chair and told me I didn't need to decide immediately. We could wait and see how the criminal case progressed first, then make decisions about civil action. That felt better, like I had time to think without pressure. I thanked her and gathered up the spreadsheets to review at home. That same week, Kay woke up screaming twice from nightmares. The first time was Tuesday night around 2 a.m. I heard her crying out and ran to her room, finding her sitting up in bed with tears streaming down her face. She'd been dreaming about the tattoo shop, about being held down and not being able to get away. I climbed into bed next to her and held her while she cried, my heart breaking. The second nightmare came Thursday night. Similar content, but she woke up shaking instead of crying. After that second night, I pulled out the notes Dong had given me about bedtime routines for trauma processing. I set up a small speaker in her room and found a playlist of calming instrumental music. I ordered a weighted blanket online with overnight shipping. When it arrived Friday, I helped Kay make her bed with the new blanket, and we tested out the music together. That night, I sat with her until she fell asleep, rubbing her back carefully around the tattoos while the soft music played. She eventually settled into steady breathing, her body relaxing under the weighted blanket. I stayed there another 20 minutes just to be sure before sneaking out. The exhaustion was catching up with me hard, dark circles under my eyes and constant tiredness, but seeing her finally sleep peacefully made it worthwhile. Monday afternoon, the school counselor called my cell phone while I was at work. A classmate had made a comment about Kay's tattoos during gym class after seeing them when Kay was changing. The other kid had said something about them being cool and asking where Kay got them. Kay had immediately burst into tears, and the gym teacher brought her to the counselor's office. The counselor told me she'd addressed it right away with both the other child and the teacher, explaining that comments about other students' bodies weren't appropriate. She'd kept everything low-key to avoid drawing more attention to the situation. Kay had calmed down after talking with the counselor for a while and went back to class. I thanked her for handling it so quickly and professionally. After I hung up, I sat in my car in the work parking lot feeling angry all over again. Kay shouldn't have to deal with questions and comments about something that was forced on her, She shouldn't have visible reminders of trauma on her body that other kids could see and ask about. I gripped the steering wheel hard and took deep breaths until the anger passed enough that I could go back inside. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived in the mail from the health department. I opened it at the kitchen table and pulled out the official inspection report for Cassie's tattoo shop. They'd cited her for multiple violations. Sanitation issues including inadequate sterilization procedures for equipment, record-keeping problems with missing or incomplete client files, failure to maintain proper consent documentation, especially for verifying client ages and parental authorization. The violations weren't severe enough to shut her down immediately, but they imposed corrective action requirements. Cassie had 30 days to implement new procedures and documentation systems. Follow-up inspections would be scheduled to verify compliance. If she failed to correct the issues, her license could be suspended. I read through the whole report twice, feeling this growing confidence in the institutional process. Multiple agencies were holding Cassie accountable from different angles: the criminal investigation, the custody court, and now the professional licensing board. It felt like the system was actually working for once instead of failing us. That evening, a notification popped up on the co-parenting app. Jacques had sent a private message. I opened it carefully, knowing Amelia could see everything sent through the app. The message was long and rambling. He said he'd been thinking a lot about everything that happened. He was willing to leave Cassie if it meant getting more time with Kay. He understood now that Cassie had crossed serious lines and he should have protected Kay better. If I would agree to more flexible custody arrangements, he would end his relationship with Cassie immediately. I screenshot the message and forwarded it straight to Amelia before responding. She called me within 10 minutes. Her voice was firm as she explained this was classic manipulation. He was trying to negotiate custody based on his relationship choices, using Cassie as a bargaining chip. I should absolutely not engage with that kind of manipulation. Custody decisions would be made by the court based on Kay's best interests, not based on whether Jacques was dating someone. I took a breath and typed out a short response through the app. Custody arrangements would be determined by the court based on what's best for Kay. Nothing more, nothing less. I hit send and closed the app, feeling proud of myself for not taking his bait. The following week, Detective Bradshaw conducted a formal recorded interview with Jacques at the station. He called me afterward to give me an update. Jacques had finally admitted to holding Kay's shoulders during the tattooing process. He'd tried to frame it as helping Kay stay still for her safety, claiming he didn't realize how much it was actually hurting her. But the admission was recorded and would be used in the criminal case. The detective's tone suggested this was a significant development. I hung up feeling this strange mix of vindication and sadness. Vindication because now there was official recorded proof of what Jacques did. Sadness because Kay's own father had participated in hurting her, had physically held her down while she cried and begged for it to stop. I sat on the couch for a long time after that call, processing the reality of what kind of father would do that to his child. Amelia spent the next week buried in paperwork. She called me in for a meeting on Friday afternoon, and I walked into her office to find a thick file folder on her desk. She'd compiled all our discovery materials into one organized package: medical records from the urgent care visit with photos of Kay's injuries, CPS reports from Sophia's investigation and home visits, health inspection findings from the tattoo shop, supervised visit reports from Stella documenting Jacques' inappropriate behavior and Kay's discomfort, police documentation including Detective Bradshaw's investigation notes, and the incident report from Cassie's protective order violation. Amelia walked me through each section, explaining how each piece supported our case for modified custody. The medical records established physical harm. The CPS reports showed Kay's emotional state and our stable home environment. The health inspection proved Cassie's shop had ongoing compliance problems. The visit reports demonstrated Jacques couldn't provide appropriate support. The police documentation showed both Jacques and Cassie's poor judgment and boundary violations. I sat there looking at this thick file, impressed by how much evidence we'd gathered in just a few weeks. It felt solid and thorough, like we had a real case built on facts instead of just emotions. The next Tuesday, Sophia came to our house for another home visit. She had a formal service plan printed out for Jacques. She sat at our kitchen table and walked me through the requirements. Jacques would need to complete parenting classes focused on child development and appropriate boundaries. The classes ran 12 weeks and covered topics like age-appropriate expectations and recognizing manipulation. He'd also be required to participate in family counseling if he wanted to eventually progress to unsupervised visits. The plan included strict provisions that Cassie could have no contact with Kay whatsoever, not even indirect contact through Jacques. If Jacques violated that provision, his visits would be suspended immediately. Sophia explained that Jacques' lawyer had already reviewed the plan, and Jacques had agreed to all the terms. He was scheduled to start the parenting classes the following Monday. I felt this small sense of hope hearing that he'd agreed without fighting it. Maybe it was a tiny step toward actual accountability, toward him recognizing he'd failed Kay and needed to do better. Sophia gathered up her papers and told me she'd check back in a month to see how Jacques' compliance was going. I walked her to the door feeling like maybe, finally, we were building something that would actually protect Kay long-term. That night, I sat on my bed with my phone in my hands, staring at the social media apps on my screen. My fingers hovered over the icons. I wanted to post everything. The photos of Kay's back, screenshots of Cassie's panicked texts, the video evidence. I wanted everyone to see what they did, wanted their friends and family to know the truth. I opened the app and started typing a post, my thumbs moving fast across the keyboard. But before I hit share, I stopped. I called Dong instead. He answered on the second ring, and I told him what I was about to do. He listened quietly while I explained how badly I wanted to expose them, how much I wanted everyone to see their faces and know what kind of people they were. He asked me what I thought would happen after I posted it. I said everyone would know the truth. He asked if that would help Kay or hurt her. I stopped talking. He explained that posting everything might feel good for a few minutes, might satisfy my anger temporarily, but Kay would have to live with those images online forever. Her classmates might see them. Future employers might find them. The defense lawyers would use my post to paint me as unstable and vindictive. I would damage our legal case for temporary satisfaction. I sat there holding the phone, feeling my anger drain into something heavier. He was right. I closed the social media apps without posting anything. I deleted the draft I'd written, then I opened my calendar and looked at Kay's next therapy appointment, focusing on that instead of my need for public revenge. 2 days later, Amelia called with news about the administrative hearing for Cassie's tattoo license. The board had reviewed all the evidence from the health inspection and the criminal investigation. They voted to impose an interim suspension pending the outcome of the criminal case. Cassie couldn't operate her shop or perform any tattoo work until the board made a final decision. Amelia's voice carried satisfaction when she told me this was a big deal, that the board was taking the violation seriously. I asked what it meant for Cassie's business, and Amelia explained that without being able to work, Cassie would lose income and clients. The shop might not survive even if she eventually got her license back. I felt a small sense of justice hearing that, not because I wanted to destroy her business out of spite, but because there needed to be real consequences for what she did to Kay. That same afternoon, my phone buzzed with a long text message from Cassie. I looked at the screen and saw paragraph after paragraph of apologies and explanations. She was crying when she wrote it. I could tell from the typos and the rambling sentences. She begged for a chance to explain herself, said she never meant to hurt Kay, claimed she thought she was helping Kay feel strong and confident. She wrote about her own childhood trauma and how tattoos had helped her heal. She said she understood now that she was wrong and just wanted to make things right. I read the whole message without responding. Part of me was curious what excuses she would make, what justification she could possibly offer, but I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the entire text to Amelia with a note saying Cassie had contacted me directly. Within an hour, Amelia sent a formal cease and desist letter to Cassie's attorney demanding all contact go through legal channels. She told me the boundary was necessary to protect our case and my peace of mind. I agreed, even though some small part of me wondered what else Cassie might have said if I'd let her keep talking. The following Thursday was Kay's school talent show. Jacques was allowed to attend under the terms of the protective order, but had to stay at least 20 feet away from us at all times. I sat in the third row with Kay beside me, watching her fidget with her program. Across the room near the back wall, Jacques stood alone. Other parents chatted in small groups around the auditorium, laughing and taking photos of their kids on stage, but nobody stood near Jacques. He looked miserable standing there by himself, his shoulders hunched and his hands shoved in his pockets. I watched him for a few minutes between performances. He kept glancing over at us, then looking away when he saw me watching. I felt this complicated mix of feelings sitting there. Part of me felt empathy seeing him isolated and facing consequences. He looked genuinely unhappy, like he understood he'd messed up badly, but another part of me stayed angry, remembering how he held Kay's shoulders down while she screamed and begged. He enabled her trauma. He chose Cassie over protecting his own daughter. The empathy and anger existed together in my chest, neither one canceling out the other. 3 days after the talent show, Amelia called with bigger news. The district attorney had filed criminal charges against Cassie for endangering the welfare of a child and unlawful tattooing of a minor. They also filed a misdemeanor charge against Jacques for his role in restraining Kay during the tattooing. Amelia's voice was steady and professional as she walked me through what each charge meant. I felt relief wash over me hearing that the state was taking this seriously enough to press charges. But right behind the relief came anxiety. I asked Amelia if this meant Kay would have to testify at trial. The thought of putting her through that made my stomach hurt. Amelia said she'd already talked to the DA's office about minimizing Kay's direct involvement as much as possible. They had the video evidence and the medical records and the forensic interview. They would do everything they could to spare Kay from having to take the witness stand. I thanked her and hung up, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. A week later, Amelia called again. Cassie's lawyer had approached her about a possible plea deal. Cassie would accept probation, mandatory counseling, and a no-contact order with minors in exchange for avoiding jail time. The DA was considering the offer because it would spare Kay from having to testify at trial, but they wanted my input before making a decision. Amelia asked me what I thought. I sat there on my couch struggling with the question. Part of me wanted harsher punishment. I wanted Cassie to go to jail for what she did. I wanted her to face the full weight of the legal system. But another part of me just wanted this whole process to end for Kay's sake. Every court date and legal proceeding meant more stress and more reminders of what happened. If a plea deal could end things faster and keep Kay off the witness stand, maybe that was worth accepting even if it meant Cassie got off easier than she deserved. I told Amelia I needed time to think about it. She said that was fine and we'd talk more after I'd had a chance to process. 2 weeks after that, we had a custody mediation session scheduled. I drove to the courthouse and met Amelia in the hallway outside the mediation room. Jacques arrived with his lawyer a few minutes later. We all sat around a conference table with a neutral mediator who explained the process. The mediator worked through a framework for Jacques' path back to more normal visitation. The plan included specific benchmarks he had to meet: complete his parenting classes, show consistent appropriate behavior during supervised visits, participate in family therapy. The mediator outlined a timeline where Jacques could gradually earn back more time with Kay if he met each requirement. I listened to the whole plan and agreed to the framework, but I insisted that Cassie's no-contact order with Kay had to be permanent. No exceptions, no gradual easing of restrictions. Cassie would never be allowed around Kay again. Jacques' lawyer tried to argue, but I wouldn't budge. The mediator noted my position and we moved on to other details. The following Monday, we went back to court for a hearing on extending the temporary custody orders. The judge reviewed all the progress reports and compliance documents. He extended our temporary orders for another 60 days. I kept primary custody. Cassie remained barred from any contact with Kay. The judge also set specific compliance benchmarks Jacques had to meet before visits could become unsupervised. He needed to finish his parenting classes. He needed positive reports from the supervised visit supervisor. He needed to participate in family therapy sessions. Walking out of the courthouse that afternoon, I felt like we were finally building stable ground under our feet. The legal framework was solid. The boundaries were clear. Kay had protection. That Wednesday, I sat in the waiting room at Dong's office during Kay's therapy session. There was an observation window where I could watch without being seen. Kay sat on the floor with Dong, playing with some toys while they talked. I watched as Dong explained body autonomy to her in words she could understand. He told her that her body belonged to her. Nobody else had the right to do things to her body without her permission. He taught her words to use when something didn't feel right. He had her practice saying no and stop in a firm voice. I watched Kay sit up straighter as she practiced. Her voice got louder each time she said the words. Dong praised her for being strong and clear. By the end of the session, Kay was smiling a little, looking proud of herself. I sat there in the waiting room feeling proud too. She was learning to protect herself. She was finding her voice again. The next week, Amelia called with final news about the plea deal. Cassie had accepted it. She pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for 2 years probation, community service hours, mandatory counseling, and a formal no-contact order prohibiting her from being around any minor children. Her tattoo license suspension would be extended to match her probation period. Amelia walked me through all the terms and asked how I felt about it. I sat there trying to sort out my feelings. Part of me still wanted harsher consequences. I wanted Cassie to face jail time for what she did, but another part of me felt relieved that Kay wouldn't have to testify. The process could end now instead of dragging on for months through a trial. Cassie would have a criminal record. She couldn't work with kids. Her business was essentially over. Those were real consequences, even if they weren't as severe as I'd wanted. I told Amelia the resolution felt bittersweet, but I could accept it. She said that was a healthy way to look at it, and we'd move forward from here. Over the next few weeks, Jacques actually followed through with his parenting class requirements. I got updates from Stella after each supervised visit, and she reported small but real changes in how he acted around Kay. He stopped making excuses about what happened. He stopped saying things like it was just a mistake or everyone overreacted. During one visit, he told Stella directly that he messed up bad and should have protected Kay instead of holding her down. Stella wrote all of this in her reports and sent copies to me in the court. I read through them carefully, looking for signs he was just saying what people wanted to hear. But the consistency across multiple visits made me think maybe he was actually getting it. I stayed cautious, though. Words were easy. Actions over time would prove if he really changed. Still, I appreciated that he was participating instead of fighting the whole process. That was more than I expected from him, honestly. I met with Amelia at her office to file the civil claim against Cassie and Jacques. We sat at her conference table with all the receipts and invoices spread out in front of us. Medical bills from the urgent care visit, therapy costs from Dong's sessions, prescriptions for the antibiotic ointment, estimates for future tattoo removal procedures. Amelia typed everything into her laptop while I organized the papers into neat stacks. She explained we were keeping the claim focused on actual damages, real costs we could prove with documentation. No huge punitive amounts that might make a judge skeptical. Just the money we spent and would need to spend to help Kay heal. The total came to several $1,000s already, with tens of thousands projected for the removal procedures over the coming years. Amelia filed the paperwork electronically that afternoon. 2 days later, Jacques' lawyer sent a message through Amelia saying Jacques wouldn't fight reasonable medical costs. That surprised me. I expected him to argue about every dollar. Maybe the parenting classes were actually sinking in. The dermatologist appointment happened on a Thursday afternoon. I took Kay out of school early and we drove to the medical plaza across town. The waiting room had pictures of before and after tattoo removals on the walls. Kay sat close to me, her hand gripping mine tight. The doctor was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who specialized in laser removal procedures. She examined Kay's back carefully, taking measurements and photos. Then she sat with us and explained the whole process. The tattoos could be removed, but it would take multiple sessions spread over several years. Each session would hurt. Kind of like getting the tattoo but backwards. The black ink would fade fastest. The green and red would take longer. Even after all the treatments, there might be some faint shadows left behind. The cost would be expensive, probably $15,000 to $20,000 total. Insurance wouldn't cover it since it was cosmetic. Kay listened to all of this with a serious expression. Afterward, she asked if waiting until she was older would make it easier. The doctor said yes. Her skin would handle it better as a teenager. I made notes on my phone about everything. Adding the projected costs to our civil claim spreadsheet, the long-term implications felt overwhelming. This wasn't something that would just go away. Kay would carry these marks in the process of removing them for years. Detective Bradshaw called me the following Monday. The criminal investigation was officially closed now that charges were filed and plea deals accepted. He thanked me for being cooperative throughout the process and keeping good documentation. Then he told me about Yvette Gentry, a victim advocate who worked with families dealing with child abuse cases. He gave me her contact information and said she could help connect us with support groups and resources for long-term healing. I thanked him for taking Kay's case seriously. A lot of people might have brushed this off as a custody dispute or overreaction, but he treated it like the assault it was. He told me he had daughters himself and couldn't imagine someone doing this to them. We said goodbye and I saved Yvette's number in my phone. Later that week, I called her and we set up a meeting. She sent me links to support groups for parents of abused children and information about trauma-informed parenting techniques. Having these resources made me feel less alone in figuring out how to help Kay heal. Sophia showed up for the quarterly CPS review on a Wednesday morning. She sat in my living room with her folder of notes and went through her checklist. How was Kay doing in the school? Was she attending therapy regularly? Were the supervised visits happening on schedule? Was our home environment stable? I answered each question and showed her Kay's recent report card and the calendar where I tracked all her appointments. Sophia reviewed everything carefully. Then she told me her recommendation. Jacques' compliance had been decent overall. He completed his first round of parenting classes. The supervised visit reports showed improvement in his behavior. She would recommend continued supervised visitation until he finished his full program requirements. No unsupervised time yet. The structure felt right to me. It gave Jacques a clear path forward if he kept working on himself, but it also kept Kay protected while he proved he could maintain the changes. Before Sophia left, she told me I'd done an excellent job advocating for Kay while working within the system. That meant a lot coming from someone who saw hundreds of cases. I wasn't perfect, but I was trying my best to do right by my daughter. Amelia suggested we switch to a co-parenting app for all communication with Jacques. She sent me the download link and helped me set up my account. The app documented every message with timestamps and prevented anyone from deleting conversations. It also had built-in filters that flagged hostile or inappropriate language. Within a day of switching over, the constant barrage of angry texts from Jacques stopped completely. Instead, I got brief factual messages through the app. Visit time confirmed for Saturday at 2. Kay left her jacket at the center. Can you bring her inhaler to next visit? Just simple logistics about Kay's needs and schedule. No accusations, no defensive rants, no attempts to rehash the past. The reduction in conflict made daily life noticeably calmer. I could check the app once or twice a day instead of having my phone blow up constantly. It removed so much stress from the situation. Kay had therapy every Tuesday afternoon. I usually sat in the waiting room, but sometimes Dong let me observe through the one-way window. This particular session, Kay was talking about the day she got the tattoos. She told Dong she remembered feeling scared when Jacques held her shoulders down. His hands were heavy on her and she couldn't move. She tried to twist away, but he held her still. Cassie kept telling her to stop being a baby. Kay's voice got quieter as she talked about it. I sat there in the observation room listening to my daughter describe her father restraining her while his girlfriend hurt her. My hands clenched into fists. My jaw tightened. But I stayed quiet and still. I didn't burst into the room or start crying or let my anger show. After the session ended, Dong came out to talk to me. He said my steady presence during these disclosures was helping Kay feel safe enough to process what happened. She needed to know she could share these hard memories without me falling apart. I was learning to hold space for her pain without letting my own rage take over. It wasn't easy. Every detail made me want to scream. But Kay needed me to be her anchor, not another storm she had to weather. 3 weeks after filing the civil claim, Amelia called with news about a settlement offer. Cassie's insurance company wanted to settle rather than go to trial. They would cover all of Kay's medical and therapy expenses. They would pay a significant portion of the projected tattoo removal costs, around $12,000. As part of the settlement terms, Cassie's tattoo shop would close permanently. Her business license would be surrendered. Amelia walked me through the offer carefully. It wasn't everything we asked for, but it was substantial. Most importantly, it meant Kay wouldn't have to testify or relive the trauma in court. I thought about it for a day, talked it over with my sister, prayed about it. Then I told Amelia to accept the settlement. The money would lift a huge financial burden. Knowing Cassie's shop was closing gave me some satisfaction. She wouldn't be able to hurt another child the way she hurt Kay. The settlement papers arrived by courier 2 days later. I signed them and sent them back. The check came a week after that. I deposited it immediately into a dedicated account for Kay's medical expenses. No amount of money could fix what Kay went through, but at least we had resources now to help her heal. The final custody hearing happened on a cold morning in November. I wore my best professional outfit and met Amelia outside the courthouse. We went through security and took the elevator up to family court. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Just the judge's bench, a few tables, and some chairs for observers. Jacques sat with his lawyer on one side. I sat with Amelia on the other. The judge reviewed all the evidence we'd submitted over the past months. Medical records, CPS reports, supervised visit evaluations, parenting class certificates, therapy progress notes. She asked a few clarifying questions. Then she issued her ruling. I was designated primary custodial parent. Jacques would have supervised visits for the next 6 months. After that, he could petition for unsupervised time if he completed all his requirements and maintained appropriate behavior. The supervisor would need to submit positive reports. He would need to continue therapy. Cassie's no-contact order with Kay was made permanent. She could never be around Kay again. The judge signed the order and handed copies to both lawyers. I walked out of that courthouse feeling like we finally had solid legal protection in place. The custody arrangement was clear. The boundaries were enforced. Kay had the structure and safety she needed. Dong called me that evening after Kay's session. He wanted to give me an update on her progress. Her sleep had improved significantly over the past month. The nightmares were less frequent, maybe once a week instead of every night. She was using the coping strategies he taught her when triggers came up. Deep breathing, grounding techniques, talking about her feelings instead of holding them in. She still had hard days where everything felt overwhelming, but those days were becoming less common. Kay was starting to talk about the future without constant fear. She mentioned wanting to try out for the school play next semester. She asked about summer camp options. She made plans with friends for sleepovers. These were signs that she was rebuilding her sense of safety and normalcy. Dong emphasized the progress was real and earned through hard work. It wasn't magical or complete. Kay would probably always carry some effects from the trauma, but she was genuinely better. She was healing. Hearing that made everything we'd been through feel worth it. I built a routine that actually worked. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons became Kay's therapy time with Dong, and I started seeing someone too on Monday mornings before work. My boss let me adjust my schedule so I could make the appointments without stress. I stopped answering my sister's calls when she wanted to gossip about Jacques, just sent a text saying I needed space. My friend Maria came over every Sunday for coffee and never once asked about the legal stuff unless I brought it up first. Life felt manageable in a way it hadn't since this whole thing started. I could get through a full workday without my phone blowing up. Kay could go to the school without me worrying constantly about what might happen. We had clear rules and everyone knew what to expect. 3 weeks later, Dong called to tell me Jacques had submitted an apology letter as part of his therapy homework. It came through Dong's office like it was supposed to, respecting the boundary about no direct contact with Kay outside supervised visits. Dong asked if I wanted to review it first, but I told him to handle it with Kay privately since it was really for her. He met with Kay the next day and explained what the letter was. She listened to him describe it and then said she wasn't ready to read it yet. Dong told me she seemed calm about the decision, not upset or angry, just clear that she needed more time. He respected her choice completely and told her the letter would be there whenever she felt ready. They scheduled a review meeting for 2 months from now, after Jacques finished his full program. Kay seemed okay with having that timeline, knowing there was a plan, but no pressure. Every night before bed, I helped Kay apply the healing ointment to her tattoos. The angry red had faded to pink, and the black ink wasn't as sharp as it used to be. They were still there, still visible reminders of what happened, but they were slowly getting better. Our house felt calm now with routines Kay could count on. Dinner at 6, homework after, bath time at 8, then I tucked her in with her stuffed rabbit. She fell asleep peacefully most nights without the nightmares that used to wake her up screaming. I sat on the edge of her bed watching her breathe slowly and evenly, feeling grateful we made it through the worst part, and built something stable and safe on the other side. That's the full story and the lesson wrapped together. I love when a simple story turns into something we can actually learn from. If it gave you a new idea or a bit of motivation, that's all that matters. Subscribe so you never miss the next one.